Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of this Q&A. If you missed it, last week I put part 1 up. That's really the one you want to watch because that's the one with all of the puppy videos. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Everest asked, how does the publishing industry react to younger authors? Of course, you have those once-in-a-million authors, but do they otherwise support them or reject them? If so, why? This is just not an area where I feel like I can generalize at all. I have heard firsthand accounts of both young authors not being taken seriously when they go on submission, whether it's by literary agents or editors. And I have heard and witnessed firsthand accounts of not only them getting full support, but publishers actively seeking out younger authors, like a young adult who is writing a young adult novel and ideally has a big social media platform. Publishers will put some money behind those books because to them, as far as marketing goes, they see the young age as a marketing angle. The obvious, idea being that a young reader will relate more and be more excited about a book if they know that the person who wrote it was their age. Off the top of my head, I can think of a ton of really successful, authors who were really young when they got their starts. In fact, when I was first starting out writing, and I've talked about this before, but I co-founded a blog called YA Highway. It's now defunct, but we ran for several years. And two of our original members in the early years were Cody Keplinger, who wrote The Duff. That was her first novel. She's had many since then, and she was 17 when she got her book deal. And Veronica Roth, who wrote the Divergent series while in college, very young. So, yeah, absolutely. You can get a ton of support and attention from a publisher, and maybe also in some cases you aren't taken seriously. So I think it goes both ways. Overall though, when you query a literary agent or even when you go on submission, there's no reason for you to mention your age. I actually remember when Cody signed with her literary agent, the agent didn't know she was 17 until Cody was like, I think I need parental permission or a co-signer on this contract. And the agent was like, oh dang, you're young. So, you don't have to mention it in your query. You don't have to mention it in your submission, and just send it out there, I would say, and see what happens and go from there. In today's time of understaffed publishers and overworked editors that may not be able to help you as much as they used to, giving their full attention to your work, would it be better to edit your book to the extent you would if you were to self-publish before submitting to an actual publisher? That way the editor has less than worry about. Or would that be a futile effort because the edits may not be up to the publisher's preference that their in-house editor knows how to do? Okay, so I would say no. I would say don't waste your money on that. And there's a question later about copy edits, and I'm gonna have the same answer there. The reason is this: you do want your book to be as polished as possible when you query and when you go on submission, obviously. No editor or agent expects you to have a copy edit on your book. A copy edit is a very specific thing. They don't expect that. And as far as like a developmental edit goes, at that point, a lot of it is subjective. A lot of it is just about what your vision is for your book and what the editor's vision is for your book. So for example, if you go to auction, you will likely have phone calls with the different editors that are offering on your book. I was in this situation with Olive and the Backstage Ghost, and I had one editor who was like, I actually think this is in really great shape. Here are a few minor changes I would make, but I think it's really close. And I had another editor who said, I want to lean into the darkness a lot more. I think there's some really dark stuff in there and we can dig a little deeper and bring it up. And that was the editor I went with because that was in line with what I wanted for the book. So at a certain point, it becomes about vision, not about like being technically correct. So, I would say it's just so expensive. Don't waste your money on a developmental editor. Get beta feeders? No, this is not about fish. Beta readers and critique partners, and, make it as great a manuscript as you possibly can. But yeah, don't spend your money on hiring editors and copy editors if you're planning on going the traditional route. Okay, next from Annie. How do you manage your goals and expectations for your books in regards to success, sales, and reviews? I don't. I had, let's see. So my very first series, I think my expectations were well and truly in check because it was a paperback series, I knew it wasn't going to be this like big marketing push. It was very much like my biggest hope was that it would get into some classrooms and do well in the school and library market. It ended up getting chosen. This was published by Penguin, but it was chosen to be in the Scholastic Book Club, and to me that was like a huge deal. I hadn't counted on any more than that. With some books that I published later, I was in a few cases told I would be a lead title, and I did make the mistake of, well, believing them and thinking, oh, okay, well, this might be a little bit of a breakout for me. Like, maybe this will be considered for some awards. Maybe I'll make some shortlists, or, maybe this. And, ultimately it never happened. And now my expectations are on the floor. I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm not even unhappy about it, because it means that anytime anything remotely positive happens, anytime I get any kind of good news from any editor, I'm like, oh, holy crap, I wasn't expecting this at all. So I feel like it sounds really discouraging to say lower your expectations. But yeah, I would say just understand how competitive this is, how truly rare it is for books to do things like hit the New York Times bestseller list, which is totally manufactured, or, be considered for certain awards. And just like start there and appreciate every good thing that happens for you in your book. Why do most publishing networks despise memoir writers and memoirs in general? That's really interesting. So this is just going to be me totally speculating here, because I don't know that I've necessarily heard that. I think memoir as a genre is quite popular, but you've got celebrity memoirs and memoirs from just people who have really big platforms already, and the occasional memoir where it's not about the author's name. It's not that they're famous, it's just that the story was so compelling that it catches on. I believe Education is an example of like the most recent kind of memoir phenomenon. So if I had to hazard a guess, if you're experiencing hostility or eye rolls about writing a memoir, this is my guess. And please know that this is not my personal opinion, okay? This is just like based on my observations. Anytime I teach a writing workshop, at least half the students in the room, and this is for students of all ages, including adults, they're writing something close to a memoir or semi-autobiographical. And if you're a beginner in particular, that makes a lot of sense, because you write what you know, you write about your life. Maybe it's straight up a memoir, or maybe, you're writing a work of fiction, but really it's heavily based on your own childhood or your own experience. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But a memoir is not the same thing as a biography or an autobiography. A memoir has an angle, it has a theme, and it's not just like a telling of the story of someone's life point by point. Like, life doesn't really make narrative sense.
You saw a movie that was like real life. You'd be like, what the hell was that movie about? Life doesn't make narrative sense.
Or at least most of the time it doesn't. And I think that's probably where the eye rolling comes in. They think that the memoir is really just going to be somebody telling them, I grew up here, and this was my family situation, and this was what happened to me in school, and this is where I went to college, and da 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 da. And that's not really what a memoir does. And you know what? Maybe you are writing an amazing memoir that does read like a novel. I think you said that in your comment, which, I mean, that's awesome. And it doesn't mean that it's not really seriously compelling. I just feel like sometimes the eye rolling might be because teachers, editors, agents probably get a lot of memoir queries or submissions that are just like, here's the story of my life, and there's no marketable angle to it. All right, next question from Amy Sue. What's your favorite part of traditional publishing? All of the support. I mean, every time I go to write acknowledgments for a book and I think through, make my list of who all worked on this book so I can remember to thank all of them, it like really kind of blows my mind. You've got usually multiple editors. You've definitely got multiple copy editors and people in managing ed doing all of the different passes. You've got all the people that worked on the design and the cover. And then, you know, that's just the editorial and the managing ed department. And then you've got all the people in sales and marketing and publicity who are working on your book. And it's just like really mind-blowing to me that I wrote this thing up in a Word document, took this story out of my head and put it there, and was paid money to have people do this and then get it out into bookstores. And I can go into a Barnes & Noble or into an indie bookstore and see it on the bookshelf and hold the beautiful copy in my hands. Like, that never gets old, and I will never not be grateful for it. Okay, next question. As a writer who has mental illness, one of my biggest worries is that my openness about my mental health will end up landing me on a red flag list for potential agents and publishers. Are my worries warranted? Good God, I hope not. Look, obviously I can't say there's no blacklist in publishing. I mean, I'm sure there are various types of blacklists in publishing, but a mental health blacklist, that would really shock me, because just the people I know who work in publishing struggle with mental illness too. Like, and I've heard so many stories, some publicly, some authors who talk about it openly, but also, you know, from friends who have mental illness or some sort of disability, and their editors work with them and are completely open to like being flexible with the schedule and making sure that they're comfortable and they're able to get done what they need to get done, and that they don't feel that pressure. So I would say no, I really don't think I don't think that would happen to you. I really hope it wouldn't happen to you. And I would definitely say that when you do find yourself speaking to an agent or an editor about a book deal or representation, you know, don't be afraid to bring it up. I would put money on them being very compassionate and listening and being willing to work with you. And if they aren't, run. All right, next question is from Dennis. I've written my book, I've edited it a gazillion times, I've received feedback from beta readers and edited based off their feedback. Should I hire a copy editor before I start to query an agent? My understanding is if my book is picked up, they will also send it in to their own developmental and copy editor. Just feels a bit redundant and expensive. Yes, it is redundant and expensive, and this is what I answered in the previous question. It is don't waste your money on it. Traditional publishing is not supposed to cost you any money. And copy edits, developmental edits are about vision. Your editor is going to want to work with you to apply a vision for the final version of this book that you will both work on together. And then copy edits, no agent, no editor expects your book to be copy edited. They will take care of that. It'll go through multiple passes. So save your money, don't do it. All right, I did get a couple of reading questions, including this one from Amy Sue. Your fave reads of 2021 so far, and any upcoming releases on your radar. Okay, favorite read so far. I have been meaning to do this whole newsletter thing that I asked you guys for help on, and you were so helpful with a couple weeks ago. This packing for this retreat that I'm going on is like completely, today has been a lot. But I'm gonna get around to it, and I want to start doing like a what I'm reading this week kind of thing. But let's see, recently I did read, well, you guys know that I did that video on 9 Perfect Strangers a while back. I do really like Leanne Moriarty's books, and I read Apples Never Fall. I loved it. It's just like exactly the kind of book I expected from her. I listened to the audiobook because she always has the same narrator, Caroline Lee, and she's just like perfect tone, perfect delivery of every single line. It was very enjoyable. I've been, I just started, I'm a few chapters into the Thursday Murder Club, which I think was like a big deal last year. I'm kind of late to the party there, but it's really great so far and I'm really enjoying it. And I read Dial A for Aunties, which I read online. Somebody pitched it as Crazy Rich Asians but with murder. And I was like, yes. And it was exactly that. It was hilarious and fun. Lots of twists, just really, really great. As far as upcoming releases, I am just completely blanking out right now. I am really, really bad at keeping up with that. I used to listen to a really great podcast called All the Books, which is just like every week they put out a podcast and they're like, let's highlight about a dozen books that are coming out this week and talk about them. And they cover all genres. There's something for all tastes there. And That was really great. I need to start listening to it again because I don't know what's coming out. What's good this fall? What are you guys reading? What are you excited about? What's coming out in October and November? Tell me, because I'm clueless. All right, and now I've got a question about ghostwriting. How does the ghostwriting industry view young authors? Could a young writer get a job as a ghostwriter, or would they be unable to find work? I think this depends on what you mean by young. Do you mean young as in less than 18? Because if you're a minor, this is a freelance job, and if somebody is going to hire you and enter into a contract with you and you need like parental co-signatures, I can see that definitely posing a challenge. Also, just with ghostwriting, especially if we're talking about ghostwriting books, and this doesn't really have anything to do with age because it just depends on when you start, but people tend to want to see that you have experience writing books that have been published, whether under your own name or as a ghostwriter. So I would say it's more about the experience than the age, but if you are underage, yeah, it's going to be a little bit trickier because there's contracts involved. Okay, next question is from Annie. What's your favorite and least favorite thing about being an author? My favorite thing is I feel like this is a very boring answer, but I tell stories for a living. I mean, if you had told me when I was a kid that I'd be doing this, I would just be shocked. It would have never occurred to me that you could do this and pay your bills off of it. It's amazing. My least favorite thing, I want to say the uncertainty and the downs, because the downs are so very down when they happen, you know? It's always a roller coaster, but if I'm being honest, in a lot of ways that's my favorite thing about it too, because the ups are so very wonderful. You know, I like that this job, I kind of like that I never know what's going to happen next. Sometimes I miss having stability, because once upon a time I did have a just full-time teaching job that came with a salary, and I knew how much money was coming into my bank account every month, and I had health insurance and all that good stuff. But there's also, you know, something to be said for the excitement of not knowing what's going to happen next. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. And I've been through both. You know, I've had a lot of career highs and a lot of career lows. And yeah, that's kind of what I like and dislike equally. But ultimately, I think this just speaks to, it's like a personality trait. I would prefer this, and I continue to choose this over stability. That's not for everybody. It would make a lot of people miserable. I like the highs and I don't like the lows, but I appreciate them for how much better they make the highs feel. Next question, man, this is a good one. I'm wondering if, knowing everything you do now, is there anything you might have done differently in your writing career? I could sit here and ponder this one for a while. This is such a loaded question. This is something I should make a separate video on as well. I'm gonna try to keep it brief, but like a big part of my issues that I've talked about on a few vlogs in the past, started in 2017 when I was like, I had been selling books to publishers and doing really well and thinking, okay, I'm doing it. I'm like full-time, traditionally published author. And then everything started just kind of falling apart and I wasn't able to sell anything anymore. I think looking back on it, I would have gotten through that a lot better had I not tied my entire identity into being an author, because I did, and that just led to a lot of mental stuff that I had to work through for the next few years, and in some ways I am still working through. I didn't really have hobbies outside of books and publishing. I didn't, like, all of my friends are, not all of my friends, but most of my friends are in publishing. I lived in New York. I was like just completely surrounded by it. And when it felt like all of my publishers were saying, all right, thanks for the books you wrote, but we're done with you now. I felt like I had absolutely no worth anymore as a human. And like, logically there was a part of me that knew that wasn't true, but I was just my whole identity was just tied into this. And yeah, we all need to know that there's more to us than what we do for a living, no matter how, even if it's our dream job, you know, there's gotta be more. And so that's been like a journey for me over the last couple years, and I wish I had gotten started on that before all the book deals started kind of falling through. Okay, I love this one. Amy Sue asked, what's the first story idea you ever had? First book I ever started writing, I never finished a draft. This was in 2007. It was a high fantasy story. It was either middle grade or young adult. I don't think I really knew at the time. Kind of like walked the line between the two. And it was definitely heavily rooted in my interest, not my involvement in, but my interest in various conspiracy theories, especially political ones. And let's just say I am no longer interested in that topic, and I will never be picking up that draft again. Eunice asked what my favorite writing craft book is, and I honestly cannot pick one. I guess you guys have probably heard me talk about The Magic Words by Cheryl Klein more than any other writing craft book on this channel. And I will say it is the one that I use when I'm teaching workshops the most often, because it's not like a lot of writing craft books are like one particular method of doing one particular thing, but this book is more just a general, like, what makes great fiction, and there are so many exercises in it specifically, and like activities you can do, and as a teacher that's really helpful for me. So I would say that one, just in the fact that I go to it the most, but I don't really have a favorite. I think there's just a different writing craft book for every season of your author life. Okay, this is a similar question to what we covered earlier, but Amelia said, if you could or had to restart your career entirely, what would you do differently and what would you do the same? Okay, if I had to restart entirely, when I look back on the earlier, like the first several projects I worked on, even when I had an agent, I do think I was writing books I was excited about, but I was also paying more attention to the market and doing what I thought would be popular and have a better chance at getting me a big deal than I should have been. If I could do anything differently, I would like tell myself to just keep, everything's a gamble, so write whatever it is that you are really truly passionate about, like whatever story you love the most, no matter what the trends are right now. And as far as what I would do the same, those IP projects, man, like I think about it a lot. The very first time my agent contacted me and she was like, hey, I've got this editor who's looking for writers to audition to do this, you know, write this book. Are you interested in doing something like that? And I was like, yeah. And it just, like, without that, I don't know what I would be doing right now, because I've had so many of those since then through publishers, and it's because of that I had enough confidence to launch a ghostwriting career separately from that. So that was like a huge game changer. Definitely would not change that. All right, so this is an interesting kind of freelancey question. Tiffany says, can you tell us your top tips when pitching yourself for work in areas of publishing, ghostwriting, and freelance writing? How you got your start in each of these writing professions? Any advice for older aspiring writers with no experience or degree? Okay, well, definitely don't worry about having the degree or any kind of certification. I have a degree in music education that is hardly relevant. I have made a whole series about how I developed my whole ghostwriting career, so I'm just gonna link that up here so you can check that out. It's just a totally separate thing, and there's a lot of information there. As for freelancing, I have a dark past as a travel writer, and that's a whole can of worms. I think the least amount of money, well, no, I wrote for free, which I don't recommend you do, but I also understand that you feel like you have to do it just to get your name out there, and that's a whole other thing. I wrote 500-word articles for like $5. I wrote for Demand Studios. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's now defunct, but for a couple of years there, it was this kind of cash grab thing where you could write these, you know, Google search based titles, like how to do this on iMovie or how to write a traditional resume or whatever. The article titles were like, they would pay $25 a pop, and we would all like go into this forum, and every time the articles we would all just like grab a bunch of titles, and then I would sit there at this cafe. This was when I lived in Seattle. I would sit at a cafe for like 8 hours and just pound out $25 article after $25 article, and for a while I was raking in like hundreds and hundreds of dollars a day, and it was great. But then Demand Studios just like completely failed and disappeared, and money was gone, so it wasn't that great. I've done all kinds of stuff as a freelancer, and I have a lot of feelings on it, and I got yet another can of worms is a travel magazine I worked for a while that was like deeply misogynistic. I was told time and again that all of the hard work I was putting into it was going to result in, you know, rising the ranks a little because I was making $200 a month, and putting out some of the top performing articles on the magazine. And then there was this whole ordeal where I quit, some other women quit, and then we all started talking and we compared notes and realized we were all in a boys club. And so just with the freelancing, man, I say, like, my best advice to keep this short is know your worth, set your rates. I get some attitude sometimes from people who want to hire me and they try to negotiate with me and I won't do it. And they're like, well, so-and-so is cheaper and so-and-so is cheaper. And I say, well, good for so-and-so. I don't care. My rate is my rate because I know the value of my writing, and I don't think it is not the cheapest thing. But you know what? Like, if you are hiring someone to write a novel for you, that's a luxury. That's not a necessity. You know what I mean? And I think it keeps it fair for all of my clients that I charge every single one of them the exact same rate without compromise. So yeah, know your worth, and once you set your rate, stick to it. Don't be afraid to turn down jobs. There will be other opportunities. All right, so we talked about this a little in the last Q&A, but have you ever had perfectionism, and what is a good way to stop perfectionism? Okay, so no, I talked about this a little bit last week, but I've never been a perfectionist. I do think that can really hold you back when you're talking about creative writing, because at a certain point, the quality of a story is so subjective. You know, like, yes, you can get the grammar right. There's a right or wrong there, but the resonance of a story, and I don't know, it gets very subjective. And I think that a lot of perfectionists who are writers can pick a story to death until it starts to unravel, and it's to the story's detriment, you know? So that's a really dangerous thing. I think the best thing you can do is, and it's hard, but I think for perfectionists, it's absolutely essential to step away from your work at every stage. So, you know, you write in, let's say if you're an outliner, you write an outline, step away for 2 weeks, come back to it. Let's say you write the draft. Well, write the draft and then please step away, probably for like a month. Let other people read it. Just like try to put it out of your head. You do a revision, step away again. I think you need to take those breaks, because the longer your head is in something and the more it all starts to bleed together, the more you start to question yourself, the more you start to doubt yourself, the more all those perfectionist tendencies kick in and start screaming at you that, you know what, this is all garbage and you need to just start over from scratch. And that is almost definitely not really the case. So yeah, I would say just take lots of breaks and give yourself some grace, please. Kanashi asked, speaking of, how is your mental health doing with everything that has hit you during and because of the pandemic? Actually, thank you for asking. That's very sweet. And right now, I would say things are definitely much better. I've been, since, you know, things were really bad in February, and it was a rough couple months, I've been diligently trying to do various things like journaling, occasionally meditating, breathing exercises. I've had some therapy, exercises recommended to me by friends that I will do sometimes if on days that I feel like I need them. But right now, I feel like, fingers crossed, I'm in a pretty good place. I'm also leaving for this retreat tomorrow, so I'm like super excited, and that's helping a lot. Maddie asked, any advice for wrist, finger, elbow pain? I've been writing more consistently now and I feel like my wrists are just getting wrecked. Yes, please see a link in the description for the, what's it called, laptop table, the angle thing that I use that you've probably seen at my desk. It's amazing. I mean, that I had serious tennis elbow that was like really giving me a lot of grief last fall, and that thing just, it changed everything. Just writing at an angle where my arm is tilted up instead of being flat like that. I don't know what it is, but that's my biggest recommendation. That thing is amazing. All right, Jen asks, what's your favorite reality is stranger than fiction moment or story? You know, those things that happen in life that are too ridiculous to actually write, that you know people would think could never happen. Doesn't have to be something you experienced. Maybe it's a friend who had it happen and doesn't mind you sharing it. Oh, I have that story. And actually, I have told that story in another vlog, so I will link to that up here. But the short version of it is that I wrote a book, a sci-fi book with a pandemic, and I based the symptoms of the virus in the fictional pandemic on tuberculosis. And as I was writing the book, I started to experience the symptoms, and I finished the draft and checked into the hospital, and I had tuberculosis. It felt straight up like I had written a fictional virus into myself, and it was weird. And finally, fun question from Tiffany. Favorite fall activities planned for this year? I want to go for a walk downtown with a nice hazelnut coffee and spend the morning writing at a quilt shop. That sounds like the best afternoon ever. Yes, I do have one particular fall tradition that I have done every year for like the last 6 or 7 years, with the exception of 2020 for obvious reasons, and that is retreat.